have for the workshop here today. We've already been through a couple of hours and getting started on a marathon here for the rest of the day. But it is some extremely important subjects. I think we've got some things that are absolutely critical on this workshop agenda and the meeting tomorrow. So certainly appreciate everybody's involvement. Are we on? Got all the recording going and everything? Everything's good. Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, the first item that we have is the Math and English Language Arts standards. The discussion we've been having for a long period of time now, and we're bringing it to finality. So to have it on the agenda tomorrow for the first reading, and then for the second reading or final reading in April. So Laura, are you going to kick this off?
I'm going to kick us off, and I'm pretty quickly going to turn it over to some folks in the room from our Standards Recommendation Committee, and then the two leads of our educator advisory teams to talk about more of the specifics. But first, just let me say good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It is an absolute pleasure to be in front of you today to talk about this work again. And I know that we've had frequent updates throughout the last year about the Math and English Language Arts Standards review process. And this really represents a seminal point in that process, as the standards are before you tomorrow morning for first reading, and then the final reading will be in April. But what we'll hope to do today is I will just provide a brief overview of the process, and I know that the board members have heard this in great detail, but for the benefit of some of those in the room that might not have been as familiar with the process, want to just recap a couple of things about that process. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Lyle Alshai, who is the chairman of our Standards Recommendation Committee, and he's going to talk in more detail about their work. And then Shannon Jackson, who was the head of our educator advisory team for the English Language Arts Standards, will talk about some key changes that educators can expect to see in those sets of standards. And then finally, Dr. Joseph Jones will do the same thing for the mathematics standards. Go to the next slide. And so I have this graphic up here of our review process, not in the hopes that everyone is going to be able to read all of that small text, and it is up on our website for folks to see if they do want to read all of the small text, but merely just to highlight that this has been a comprehensive and incredibly intricate and multi-layered process. We've had many different individuals involved as a part of this process, including an opportunity for Tennesseans all across the state to weigh in on what they feel our final standard should look like. So just to highlight, we've tried our best to uphold this process to the true intent of the legislation, which is for it to be transparent and comprehensive. And we feel that we've done our best job in aiming towards that goal. Go to the next slide. And this slide, what you'll see is just a brief overview of the different components that have been a part of the process. So we began more than a year ago, back in October of 2014, when the governor announced a process and that there would be a public review website to review the Math and English Language Arts standards. And so that website opened in November of 2014 and stayed open until April of 2015, at which time we received more than 131,000 reviews and more than 20,000 comments on the current standards. So this represents, I think, far more feedback than I think we even initially anticipated we would receive on this website. And it was a great opportunity for Tennesseans across the state from many different backgrounds and many different roles, either educators or those outside of education, parents, to weigh in and provide feedback on the standards. At that point in time, we also, I'll stay on this one for a few minutes. At that point in time, there was also legislation passed by the General Assembly to add in a couple of different components to the standards review process and to really further strengthen that review process. So after we pulled down the website in April, we then convened a team of educators representing both K-12 and higher education from across the state. And they met for more than 200 hours over 20 full days of work, looking and reviewing all of the public feedback, going standard by standard, determining what types of revisions needed to be made. They added standards, they deleted standards, they revised standards, and their work has been tremendous as a part of this. So they completed their initial revisions to the standards in October, at which point in time we took those revised standards and we published them on another public review website. And that website was open from October until December of 2015. So it was a briefer period of time, but we had, once again, a great response to those standards being posted. More than 38,000 reviews during that point in time, and some additional comments were also given. We also worked with higher education faculty to take a look at the standards and make sure that they were really going to meet the desired need of having standards that are going to ensure that students are ready for post-secondary when they complete the 12th grade. We also worked with the Southern Regional Education Board to take a look at the standards and to provide feedback. They pulled in some national experts unaffiliated with Common Core to take a look at those standards and provide feedback. And then finally, as a part of that second review period, we traveled across the state, had all across the state, different regions, had 5 different roundtable conversations with educators and parents, met with more than 200 people as a part of that process to have members from our educator advisory team walk them through the changes in the new standards and to be able to seek feedback and hear that feedback firsthand from those parents and educators who were able to attend. So all of that feedback that was gathered and the revised set of standards were passed over to our standards recommendation committee. You'll see the information about them in this last box on the right. And the standards recommendation committee, that is, just as a reminder, is the group of 10 appointed individuals. So 4 were appointed by the governor, 3 by the Speaker of the House, and 3 by the Lieutenant Governor. And their charge as a part of the standards review process was to review the initial revisions that were made by our educators and to review additional public feedback, and then to ultimately recommend to you all, the State Board of Education, a set of standards in math and English language arts for approval. And so this group took their role and their task very, very seriously. We were incredibly fortunate to have individuals who really took this charge and reviewed the standards in depth, reviewed all of the public feedback, sought additional public feedback on their own to guide their decisions. And so they met 7 times throughout the last 6 months to review all of that work and to put forth a series of recommended revisions. We sent those back to our educator advisory teams. They made those revisions, and then our standards recommendation committee met for their final time last week to approve the revisions that have been made and to ultimately recommend to you all the standards that you'll see on final reading tomorrow. They also developed, and Dr. Alshai will talk about this in a little bit more detail, a position statement outlining some of their key beliefs about the implementation of the new standards. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Alshai, who is once again the chairman of our Standards Recommendation Committee. In his other full-time job, although I think we kept him pretty busy with this one, he's the director of schools for Kingsport City Schools.
Good morning, Mr. Ralston, State Board of Education. Let me make it clear how honored I am to be here on behalf of the entire Standards Recommendation Committee this morning and representing not just them, but also recommending to you a set of standards that have come through a lot of other people's eyes, ears, and hands to be revised. So literally, a lot of people have had a hand in making these truly Tennessee standards. We have a couple here. I know Ms. Shannon Duncan. What is Shannon? Maybe she had to step out.
You know, we've had a little problem getting some of the members here today because of the weather last week, and a lot of school schedules got messed up. But and I know there's at least one stuck in traffic right now. So I wanted to recognize those though. And am I supposed to hit? Okay.
Good.
You're good.
Thank you. Sorry.
Get my role right here. I want to tell you that the process that's been used has been really a rigorous one. And I think Miss Inkalad, I always butcher her name. It's like Elshai. But
Or is a lot easier.
But I think the way I process information is asking a lot of questions. So between my emails and conversations in person, I appreciate their tolerance. But Dr. Haber and her entire staff, I could not say more about them, because obviously we all do have other day jobs as we work through this. So I want to give them a shout out too. But the process, I really believe, has been rigorous. I think it's been one that the state could be proud of. The committee that you see here listed in this table encompasses classroom teachers, instructional supervisors, Board of Education members, and everyone there is involved directly in education in some way. And the results of these educators, as well as the advisory teams and review committees,
I think has resulted in some awfully good work. These standards do uphold the rigor and the clarity that I think our teachers need and deserve. They will take our students to higher levels of performance. And I want to give you just a little bit of detail about what we've done. And actually, Laura did say some of these. We did meet 7 times beginning in August. We wrapped up our work actually last week, January the 20th. We observed in the very first meeting the work of the advisory teams. It was good to be able to, for the SRC, the Standards Recommendation Committee, I mean, we have to create an acronym for everything, but for the SRC to go in and actually look at how the standards are being reviewed. And I think it's important to remember that before the SRC examined the standards, there had already been a lot of heavy lifting done, because we started really after there had been one major revision process that had already taken place. But it's good to see them. We did review a lot of public feedback. Here again, Dr. Haven and her staff summarized a lot of that for us, thank goodness. So that helped us in our analysis. And we did hear from Higher Education and the Southern Region Education Board regarding their reviews. And as Laura also said, many of us attended roundtables in our regions, just so we could hear firsthand. In addition to looking at the comments that were made online, we all went to hear and see with their own eyes as parents and teachers came and sat around tables and looked at the standards and talked about what they liked and what they'd like to see changed, what they didn't understand, etc. So after we did that, the process moved forward. And we did, and while our primary charge, and we understand that, is to recommend to you academic standards, we respectfully also submit to you today a position statement that contains 5 areas that we feel like, while not directly under our jurisdiction, that we would be remiss if we didn't include these for your consideration. And you see those listed there, and I'm going to touch base on each one of those on the following slides. The first one is on the need for professional development. And this is good news, because I think our State Department of Education has a good track record in this area, because of the standards that we have taken or being implemented in our classrooms now. The state proved that it could undertake a successful and comprehensive teacher training process. So that model at least has already been developed, and I think can be replicated. But it is imperative that our teachers be trained, and we believe that training should actually start with a review of how the standards were revised, because without that, we're afraid the teachers won't have the context of how the standards were developed and aligned, and why some decisions were made so that they see some of the things that are there. And that was talked about at different times. We also, and I'm not going to go through each of these bullets and read it to you. I know you've had that ahead of time, but I wanted to point out the last bullet there, and that is that we really need to make sure that we include our teacher preparation providers, our higher ed partners, because teachers, as they come out of these programs, we need them to come into our classrooms already understanding what these standards look like, and not only what the standards look like, but what the corresponding student work that will demonstrate student understanding and skills based upon those standards. So we want to be sure that this professional development includes them. The second recommendation is in regards to supplemental resources, and obviously that one pretty much goes hand in hand with the first one, because as a part of that professional learning process with teachers, we really need teachers to see examples, understand tools that can be used, sources that can be used, and different pedagogical strategies, because particularly in math, for example, we know we're moving to more of a conceptual understanding of math, and there are different ways to solve the same problem. And that's a very rudimentary example, but teachers need a good set of tools for their toolbox as a part of this professional learning process. And this will include curriculum materials, the use of technology,
even things like in the mathematics standards, the inclusion of some mathematical tables and how to use those for particular grades. And in the English language arts standards, there's been an inclusion of some new pieces like the foundational literacy pieces, a new vocabulary piece, and some qualitative and quantitative ways of helping teachers use a variety of tools, because there's a lot of things being used across the state, but using those to get a better indication of how to match materials to students' abilities in terms of grade level or rigor or text complexity, whatever you want to call it. In fact, we talked about the confusion around those terms, so there's some tables there to try to bring those together so that teachers have a common understanding when those terms are used. So that would some of the things that you might find in the supplemental resources that we think need to be developed around these standards. Number 3, obviously, is a key one, and that's parent communication. We are very pleased that parents had an opportunity to weigh in on these standards, but we don't need to stop there. We believe that there needs to be ongoing communication with parents, that it's not a one-time thing. We believe that it should include not only websites and social media, but as many in-person things that can happen in districts. And I think we need to understand that some systems don't have the capacity to do all of this on their own. So there's some systems that's going to need more support in the parent communication category than others. And we felt like that was an important one. And we want to have these parent communication pieces in understandable language for parents, not educatorese like sometimes we use, and to even have, rich glossaries and that sort of thing for them. The next recommendation is about empowering educators. And I've tried to stay away from using some examples already to get to this one, because when I say we, the SRC spent a great deal of time not only talking about what standards are developmentally appropriate, what alignment should look like, even some things about assessment, even though assessment's really not under our charge, but we had to at least consider the assessment pieces when we talked about standards and what those might look like. But a lot of time was spent on recommendation number 4 here, and that is about empowering educators. We did not want these standards to be prescriptive. We took out a lot of examples, particularly in the English language arts standards, because there was a perception with the current standards that we're using that when those resources were listed in the standards, teachers could misunderstand and believe that those were the only ways to teach those. So we intentionally took those examples out with the understanding and expectation that those examples would be used as a part of the professional learning process. And that at that time, it could be further explained that these are only some of the ways and some of the materials that could be used to teach those standards. So we really worked hard to take out prescriptive things of the standards. And we have some remarkable educators in this state, and we want to take advantage of their expertise and creativity and have them know that we trust them, that if we put a standard in their hands, that they will use it in the way it's intended. And then the last recommendation here is flexibility. And we did not attempt to assume any particular flexibility that might be needed. We just wanted to draw it to your attention that we all need to watch carefully as the standards process unfolds, as the professional development rolls out, and as the standards start being implemented, and then as the assessment pieces are revised. And we don't know if there will be a need for flexibility, but we just ask that you keep that in mind and help us all as state leaders to keep in tune with the school systems and Department of Ed. And if there is a need for some flexibility in the future, then we hope that everyone will remain open to that. Now, in terms of the actual standards, as I said, there was a lot of work done prior to our eyes of the SRC being put on these standards. But even then, we spent hours and hours going through this. Some of that was individual time, and some of it was time together. And as I said, we got summaries of the public feedback. We heard presentations from our higher ed partners, and we heard from the SRAB. So after that first revision, we even had that. And then after our analysis and meeting with our math and language arts advisory teams, we did come up with 19 recommendations. in those two categories total. Lose my train of thought here. I was trying to keep from looking at my notes too much. We believe that all of these recommendations were addressed successfully. Almost all of them were taken and it resulted in sort of a revision. There's one or two that didn't take as much as a revision as others. And I think it speaks highly of our language arts and mathematics advisory teams and the leads that you're going to hear from in a few minutes, because you will see why we were so impressed with their work and why they were remarkably open to everything we asked them to do. In terms of the English language arts recommendations, this is just a snapshot of what some of those are. Some had to do with the new coding system. Some had to do with the inclusion of the foundation literacy piece. And there was a lot of time spent by the review teams in those primary grades, identifying the things that should be orally done by students and those that should be written, because in the past or currently actually there's some confusion around what should be done orally and what should be done in writing. There's a comprehensive glossary. I think there's like 189 terms that's actually in the standards document to help teachers, particularly those new teachers that don't have that content knowledge yet and need some additional assistance. And I mentioned earlier the bullet there, which is actually the second sub-bullet about grade level and text complexity. A lot of work and some things provided in these standards that's never been provided before, to my knowledge, in helping students understand what that looks like and what it means, depending upon what resource they're using. In terms of the mathematics standards, we had some similar recommendations along the lines of a coding system. And I'll say a little bit more about that here, since I didn't in the English language arts, because I didn't want to repeat it. But we felt it was really important to have a new coding system for multiple reasons. One is, with the standards we're using now, if we had left that same coding in place, and we looked at the revised standards, sometimes you can change just one or two words in a standard, and it could change what the outcome of that standard was expected to produce. So we didn't want to use the same coding system, have teachers refer back to some resources that was aligned with the standard that had that code before, because it could lead them down the wrong pathway. Now, we do believe, as a part of those supplemental resources, there should be a crosswalk to the appropriate standards and the appropriate resources, so teachers don't have to start from scratch creating things that might be there available for them. But we really felt it was important to have a new coding system and start fresh. And let's face it, over a time, a few years, the old standards and the alignments will go away, and our teachers will only know this new coding system anyway. In addition to that, if we had stayed with existing codes, there would have been gaps, because where standards were taken out, you would have seen gaps in that numbering. And we really are impressed with what our teams have done in terms of creating a new coding system, and I won't go into what that looks like. I'm sure you would hear more about that later, but that was a topic of quite a bit of discussion. There's some introductory paragraphs that were put into this. There's a literacy component, even including the mathematics standards, that we believe really sets the stage in how those literacy standards can also be included in the social studies and science standards that will be coming up before you at a later time, because we know literacy really is everyone's job to some degree. So I won't say any more about that. Well, I will say one, and I know this sounds picky, and doesn't have anything really to do with the content of the standard, but I would tell you the format of the mathematics standards in particular is going to be so much more attractive and easy to understand for teachers. And it really clearly identifies, even with some color code, what's the major
Work of the grade.
major work of the grade. That's what my mind won't work that fast. In terms of what's supporting. I'll get it. But I'm telling you, teachers, and I am old, a former math teacher, so I was really excited. But I wish I'd have had that. So as a result, as I wrap up my comments, I just want you to know, as leaders of this state that sets policy for all of us, I want you to feel as good about these standards as the Standards Recommendation Committee does. We really are proud of these. They have resulted in standards that I believe will move our state forward. I do not believe we took one step back in terms of rigor. In fact, I think because of the alignment that is in place now, our students may be able to go even further than they could have, because when things aren't aligned, students struggle. We do recommend these standards to you without hesitation. These standards represent our best work, and I think the best work of many, many educators, parents, higher ed partners across this state. There is no set of standards that's ever been vetted to the degree these have been vetted. These standards are more clear, they're better aligned, they do maintain rigor, they are much more user-friendly, and they are empowering for teachers, and they provide a more meaningful trajectory for students. It's an honor and a privilege, again, on behalf of the SRC and all the other review teams, to present these to you. And at some later appropriate point, if there's any questions, I'll try to answer those. But thank you for letting me say a few words about the process and where we are today.
Thank you, Lyle.
And with that, next, I just want to introduce to the board Ms. Shannon Jackson, who was the lead for our English Language Arts Educator Advisory Team, and she also serves as the Reading and Language Arts Supervisor for secondary schools in Knox County.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to speak with you today about the key changes to the ELA standards. Before I begin, I want to show you our, is this the?
Oh, nope, you were doing it.
Okay, I wanted to start with our norms and working agreements. I think this was a very important part of the work that we engaged in, because as a team, we had to come together. None of us knew each other. We were coming from across the state. And it was really important to us that we keep our work focused and keep it focused first on student learning, but also be very deeply respectful of all the feedback that was collected to make these Tennessee standards. We also wanted to make sure that our work was careful and methodical. And so there were times where we would give ourselves assignments to do in between meetings because we needed to go out and do some work on research or looking very carefully at what was the intent behind some of the comments and the patterns that we were seeing, so that we could make meaningful changes that would produce standards that would be good for our students and our teachers. So here's an example of one of the changes that resulted with that. You can see at the bottom the percentages of the feedback. So 45% of the people said keep this standard. This was a very low keep standard for us. Most of them were in the 80%, 90% keep. But this one exemplifies some of the patterns that we saw, which was a hesitation to accept the examples. People saw those as mandates for curriculum. So a lot of the comments we saw with the original standard and the reference to Herculean said things like, so are we only supposed to teach Greek or Roman mythology? What exactly are we supposed to be teaching here? And looking at, do we only teach Herculean, or what are we supposed to do? So our revised standard opens up the curricular choices, and it also gives them the understanding of what the intent of that standard was, which is that students will recognize that words are often drawn from historical, literary, or mythological references. Okay, we also have a new coding system, and that was something that came out of the last SRC meeting, that we needed to have a coding system that was alphanumeric and that started with the grade level. Our previous standards had the grade level at the end, and math has their grade level at the beginning. That's an issue for an elementary teacher who has to read standards for all the different subjects. So if we can have our coding system match the math coding system, then teachers don't have to relearn a system for every set of standards. We also wanted to clarify in our standards what was the substandard within the larger standard. So this one would be grade 4, reading literature, craft and structure, standard number 4. One of the things that was very important to us also was to look at the learning progression. So you will see this graphic is something that our team developed, and it changes a little bit of the language of the standards. Instead of having anchor standards, we have cornerstone standards, because we built this around a masonry metaphor, and that the cornerstone is the stone that bears the most weight in a building. It's the one that they put a lot of time and attention into, and that for us are those skills that post-secondary and the workforce are telling us that the students need. And so we really wanted to make sure we had that right. Foundational skills are instrumental. You cannot build on top of a poor foundation. So that's another area of emphasis within our standards. We made the student the keystone, and the student doesn't actually show up with a keystone. There are no keystone standards. The student is the keystone of the building, always should be the main focus of whatever it is we're doing. It is the most decorative stone in the building and the one that is most prominently displayed. Building up to that are the language skills, which have to be in place on top of the foundational skills, layering in the reading skills, the speaking skills, and the writing skills. So what we've talked a lot about in our development of these standards is that students need to read about it, write about it, and talk about it in order for them to learn and to develop all of the literacy skills necessary to be successful when they leave the secondary school system. You can see some examples of us studying the progression. We took every single standard. This was when we were working on the language, and wrote them on Post-it notes and made sure we could see where they fit. And this helped us to find the holes and the gaps, and to come back and look at why they were structured the way they were. Did they live somewhere else? Why were we seeing these gaps? And to be able to build a solid progression. I can say we did not make a single change to a standard where all 30 of us did not look across those standards and examine, if we change this one standard in a particular grade, what does that do to the grades before it? What does that do to the grades after it? And so every time we made a change, we looked at the entire progression, which led to a layout change. You can see the original layout. This is how they are currently. And we changed it to this layout. So in this case, right now, literature and informational text are published as two separate sets of standards. These are next to each other. So if you're looking at the 11th and 12th grade standard, you can see what the reading expectations are for literature and for informational. But also you can see what has happened prior to your grade level. So this actually is on a full sheet that goes K through 12 with the cornerstone standard at the top. So we always know what we're working towards. Some revisions. We have proposed changing reading foundations to foundational literacy. With that, we've added 3 additional strands focusing on vocabulary, word composition, and sentence composition. So one of the things we realized as we were looking at the foundational literacy is that there was sort of an expectation that if students learned how to read words, they would also then know how to spell words, that they would know how to put words together, and we were asking them to sometimes write before we taught them how to create sentences. So we added strands that would help us to strengthen those skills and reinforce those, prioritize those in the early grades, and make that a little bit more focused and explicit within those standards. We also in that embedded language. Language was a separate set of standards in foundational, but as we're teaching students to learn their letters and we're teaching them to build their phonics skills, we're also teaching them the language that goes behind that. And so we've embedded all of that together so teachers and students don't see those as separate skills, they see those as integrated skills. So you can see the current standards on one side and the foundational standards on the other side. So the foundational standards are a little bit more robust. Okay.
Shannon, may I stop and ask
Yes.
a question? I'm sorry, if you would go back 2 slides, just some clarity on the conversation that one more.
Yes.
When you were talking about foundational literacy, was there a discussion of where to put comprehension that you clearly have on the other slide? I'm curious, what was that conversation and how were you perceiving where comprehension fit in the foundational skill set?
Right. So we have a heavy focus on the phonics and print concepts in the foundational. We are doing read alouds and discussion. We are talking about sentence meaning as we're working on sentence building. But we also have the reading literature and the reading informational standards where we are discussing comprehension, but sometimes that's through read aloud, sometimes that's through decodable text, but we've made that not so much about lifting the word off the page. It's in the reading, literature, and reading informational, where we're really developing both their oral and their reading comprehension.
So would you perceive it feels obvious that in the standards that comprehension doesn't come after you do all of these things, it's actually part of the foundation?
It
Do you
is.
feel like that's obvious?
Yes, that was something that was very important to our group, and our elementary group looked at that very, very carefully, making sure it was a complete literacy package.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. Okay, writing. This is the current writing standard for kindergarten. Use a combination of drawing, dictating, writing to compose opinion pieces in which they tell a reader the topic or the name of the book they are writing about and state an opinion or preference about the topic or the book. We changed this one, and what you can see with the underline and bolded is where they might be doing this orally. This might not be something that the student might not be the one holding the pen in kindergarten as they're doing this. The teacher might be the one holding the pen and working with the student to orally produce the language necessary for them to build this skill. The language standard, again, we wanted to clarify what was expected to be written, what was expected to be oral. And then also we wanted to make sure language standards were written to production. That the idea of knowing your grammar and your language is not to know it for its own sake, but to be able to use it when you are called to present, to write, to communicate in any kind of way, and to use it to understand what you're reading. So here's another example of where we removed anything that looked like curriculum. There was a lot of feedback on this one about what U.S. documents, do we have to teach Washington's farewell address? Is the Gettysburg Address mandatory? And so that let us know that people were seeing those examples as mandates. So we pulled out the examples, and again, we revised the standard to show them that the intent of the standard. We had some discussions around narrative writing and did a lot of work in high school around the importance of narrative writing. And one of the things we discovered is that narrative writing is a very important post-secondary skill. We do a lot of communication through narrative writing. We did strengthen the idea of it could be imaginative narrative writing, but it could also be real narrative writing, the nonfiction narrative. And for all of our students who are writing applications, they have to write their personal statements. Those are very often narrative statements. And so we did see this as an important aspect to keep in the standards. Narrative is also a great place for us to work on their language skills. So this was something that we did ultimately decide to keep as an important part of our standards. Speaking and listening, we strengthened this quite a bit because one of the things we wanted to focus on is this goes hand in hand with our research and our writing standards. We don't do a presentation just off on the fly. We prepare for a presentation, and so we wanted to make sure the language around this correlated to our research standards so that they would understand that necessity for preparation, and then also to strengthen in the collaborative speaking standards how you prepare for a conversation and how you engage in a conversation, also to build the writing skills. With the speaking and listening standards in the layout, we've included linking standards. So next to each speaking and listening standard, we have given them a list of every other standard that connects or links to the speaking and listening standard. Final thoughts. So we took this work very seriously. These are my 3 children who, as I'm thinking about the whole state of Tennessee, I'm thinking about the kids who are in my district who I represent, but I'm also thinking about my 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grader who, this is something I really want for them. And so as I was doing this work, they were never far from my mind. So leave you with that thought.
And with that, we'll go ahead and transition to some of the key revisions and changes in math. And Dr. Joseph Jones was our lead for the educator advisory team for mathematics, and he serves as the district math coordinator for Cheatham County.
Thank you for this opportunity. Before I begin, I want to make mention of a few general things. First, this effort, I believe, would not have been successful if it had not been for a couple of key people from the state that really worked with us. Dr. Shelton was extremely important to me and to the committees in making sure and guiding us and helping us. And of course, Ms. Laura, who I would not have survived this process without her. And so I just think that I would be negligent if I didn't mention that. They were vital to us, and I fully appreciate their input and their help in all of this. As we began looking at the math standards, there were, I would say, 3 key areas that we really wanted to bear in mind. One of them had to do with the progressions, of course. Extremely important that a child that begins in our education system, say kindergarten, by the time they graduate from high school, are they truly career and college ready? This phrase that we toss about quite a bit. Is there validity to that? Have we prepared them mathematically for a career? Are they where they need to be if they proceed on to post-secondary education? And so the progressions in the math standards were extremely important to us, and we paid a lot of attention to that. Another area was to make sure the standards, the intent of the standards were clear. And quite frankly, I believe a lot of the controversy that's been around standards probably had to do a lot with just outright misunderstanding, not fully grasping the intent of what the standard was really driving at. And a lot of that was due to the examples, not always clear or seem to suggest this is how you've got to teach this. And so, as has already been stated, we really took that part seriously, looking at the examples, making sure we didn't cross the line as much as we're able to into curriculum, and so looking to make sure the standards, the intent of the standards were clear to the reader. And so that was another area that we really wanted to pay attention to. And in all of this process, it was, it took a level of humility on our part, because it just wasn't myself and the team, and the team that worked on the math was, I wasn't intimidated. I felt more honored to work with such highly qualified people. If I wasn't, if I thought too long, I'd be intimidated by it. But they were really great people and knew their stuff. But yet there was an air of humility, because we weren't the only ones who had input on this. We had all of that input, and we took from the public, and we took that very, very seriously, to the extent that many times we had to reconsider, well, maybe we're not seeing this correctly. Maybe we need to rethink this, because so many people are saying, et cetera, whatever. And then the SRC committee as well. Another set of eyes, if you will, looking at the work, and then coming at us with, we had 11 paragraphs of recommendation, 11 separate paragraphs about recommendations. And I was really quite pleased with the approach of the team, in that no one went, well, who are they? And what do these people think? It wasn't that kind of discussion. It was, well, let's see what they're saying. Let's dive into this. Let's see if we can make these standards truly our own from everyone's input. And so I just wanted to make it clear of the process and how we were approaching these standards and the things that were important to us. Said this goes forward, but it's okay. Now I got it. It's slow. Give some examples. I've just put together a few things. There is so much that we could talk about, but I have a few of the highlights of things that I would like to mention that we have done with the standards. Here's an example from the early grades. I got 2 examples from early grades. This is one of them. We added in money standards. Heard from a lot of teachers, a lot of people, that in the standards, our present standards, these 2 second grade standards here, and I'll talk about the code a little bit later. The 2 on the front mean second grade. Those are the standards that we presently have. Not really a lot changed there. We saw no need to change them. But in our present standards, that's where the money aspect began. It was just all of a sudden they've got to start dealing with it. So we've included, wrote in standards in kindergarten, as you can see, identify the penny, nickel, dime, and quarter, and recognize the value of each. And then in first grade, added 2 standards as well, tell and write time in hours and half hours, whereas in the second grade, they're going to move to quarter hours, et cetera. And count the value of a set of like coins, et cetera, using the cent symbol. And so you can see that we've tried to better the progression there. And this is just one example of many places where we've had to work on the progression to try to fill gaps, to make things flow. We also wanted to touch on fluency, and especially in the lower grades. And this one's really important to me personally, being a math coordinator in a district. I'm constantly working with teachers that continually say, these kids cannot add. They do not know their times table. They can't. I hear that continuously. And it's not just teachers complaining. There's some validity to what they're saying. The kids really do struggle with these things. And somehow in our education, we're not addressing certain things like retention, for instance, just not being addressed. Teaching as hard as they are, somehow the kids are still getting to 8th grade and they still do not know how to do certain things. So part of trying to address some of this has to do with fluency. And I really like it that my elementary team decided to up the ante a little bit in kindergarten now, fluently add and subtract within 10 using mental strategies. And I want to say more about the mental strategies here in just a second. And then in first grade, fluently add and subtract within 20 using mental strategies. By the end of grade 1, know from memory all sums up to 10. That's been raised just a little bit. In kindergarten, it was fluently add and subtract within 5 previously or at present. And so it's been bumped up some. The fluently using mental strategies, a big thing in my district right now is we're really trying to implement number talks. And anybody in here that has any influence on things, think about that. Number talks are very important, to where the kids have a chance to just sit down. The teacher's not really trying to drive some algorithm into them, but they're able to just discuss mentally how they're handling numbers and to build that number sense. And so without telling teachers how to do it, we've got the implication there for them with the mental strategies and things of that nature. And so we've tried to increase the fluency expectations with all of that in mind. Moving out of the elementary world and more toward middle grades and into high school, statistics is an important mathematical topic now, more so than when I was growing up. I think most majors now require statistics, if I'm not mistaken. And we needed to make sure that our statistics, and again, this isn't the only thing we've looked at, but it's as an example of how we looked at different areas. We need to make sure that our statistics is where it needs to be to have those students ready, both career and college. I don't know that we actually incorporated additional statistic standards in 6th through 8th grade, but we did look at the progression of them, moved some things around. There seemed to be a gap in 8th grade to where the statistics just weren't as sufficient as they needed to be, but yet it was rather heavy in 7th grade for some reason. That's how the standards are. We shifted some of that. We also, and this moves into something I've got to talk about in a moment, we also began shifting some things out of statistics as far as K-11 go, and moving that more toward a statistics course that I'll talk about in a moment, a 4th year offering, so that we could slow things down and allow the teachers time to move more deeply into these foundational topics. So that, and then when the student moves into a 4th year course, high school level, their senior year, and they happen to do statistics, or when they face it in college, they have a much stronger foundation to work from. And so in Algebra 2, it's mentioned there, represent and interpret data on a single count or measurement. All of those that are listed there in the slide are really the cluster headings, and it kind of just shows you how things develop through the grades, and that's what those what the wording there is all about. I think I'm going to switch order here. I want to go, since I mentioned Algebra 2, and don't let me forget to go back a slide. In statistics especially, we were able to move some things to a fourth-year course. Algebra 2 was a bit of a bear for us to think about. And the reason for that is that we had all kinds of suggestions on this. Everybody from, hey, get rid of Algebra 2, to people saying leave it alone. And most of the comments were in between. Something needs to be done. It needs to be narrowed. And I know from my own experience that many of the teachers I've worked with talk about how it's too heavy. There's too many standards. We can't get to it all. And we end up having to teach without much depth because of that. And so we gave a long, hard look. The high school team really looked for quite some time at Algebra 2. And what made it difficult was it's a culminating course. For some of our students in Tennessee, that's going to be their last math course at the high school level. And if they have desires to move on to a college or whatever, are they ready? Can they move forward? So we had to make sure that the content was sufficient to prepare them for that. But at the same time, we also know that we can't be touching on everything under the sun and making it so broad that we still are doing a mile wide and an inch deep approach. And so the committee really looked hard at where can we move or shift some things possibly to the fourth-year courses, what's fluff that really isn't necessary for the child to be absolutely prepared for post-secondary work. A lot of the narrowing down occurred in statistics and in some of the algebraic work that was able to be moved to a pre-calculus course. And so we did narrow quite a bit. Also things like logarithms, we restricted in the high school courses through Algebra 2 to bases like 2, 10, and E, if I remember correctly. And so that narrows the focus on slowing this stuff down, allowing the teacher to have a little bit of breathing room to where they can really delve into the topic like they need to, but yet still maintaining enough so that the students are truly college and career ready. Along with those types of things was the formatting. And somebody may think the formatting, okay, fine, have a nice format. It's not that important. In reality, it's very important. The standards as we have them now have for instance, a 3-color coding, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but just to be thorough, they have a 3-color coding system, green for major work of the grade, blue supporting work of the grade, and yellow additional. And quite frankly, that I believe that has confused a lot of people. I have teachers all that, well, additional, do I not teach that, and things of that nature. And so we have wanted to simplify things down. And we have essentially 2 colors, or a color and the lack of color. A light green, and then the white represents the support, and the green, of course, the major work of the grade. The major work of the grade is where the teachers need to focus so that the progressions and things really do flow as they should. And the supporting is there to flesh that out. And professional development will need to be done to make sure teachers understand what all of that means. But this single color of a light green and then the white for the supporting, we even considered in that things like how they're going to have to print these standards off. Most, if you're in central office, you may have a color printer and you get to make things look pretty, right? But I'm telling you, most teachers have black and white, and they scramble for the ink even then. And so how's it going to work? And in this, the way we've set this up, there will be a light shading where you can at least still read the print, right? There'll be a light shading that clearly indicates major work of the grade, and of course the black and white for the supporting. So even in black and white printers, it should be good. We also put the cluster headings on the left-hand side, and then the standards which they pertain to the right, as you can see in the two columns. I believe that's very important. The cluster headings have been maybe underemphasized. Those are the big ideas that the standards are covering. So for example, and I'm getting older too, kind of like some others, all right? So I got to get a little closer to see this. Use the 4 operations with whole numbers to solve problems. That's the big idea. That's the big picture. Now, the standards to the right are going to flesh that out. They're going to give the details of that. And that really can help teachers in planning and thinking about what it is they're driving at. Teacher friendly, PD friendly, for that to be brought out and to let people see the large picture, and then let's get down to the trees, if you will. And so really like that. And we also, if you notice, color coded as well, the coding. That way, because there'll be some people that will just copy out the standards and forget about the cluster heading, or they won't include it. Well, they can still tell that it is the major work or supporting work that way. Finally, the coding itself. In K-8, we essentially maintain the coding. There's been some renumbering because we've had to change quite a few things. But very logical and straightforward, and we did not see that we needed to completely reinvent the wheel on the K-8 especially. So we have added a few things. We have the grade and then the domain. The ABC represents the clusters, and we also have that matching in the cluster column. And then, of course, the numbering of the standard itself. When we get to high school, the present standards do not separate themselves into the various courses. We've done that. We think that will help to cut down on some confusion, especially on standards that appear to go, that are included in 2 different courses. So in our high school, we have a course designation on the front end of the coding, A1 for Algebra 1, A2 for Algebra 2, G for Geometry, etc. And that, we hope, will help teachers, first of all, when they have a standard in front of them, they know what course they're looking at. And secondly, it kind of diminishes some of the confusion. Well, this standard's in Algebra 1 and in Algebra 2. Well, how far do I go with this thing? Well, now when they look at it, what it says is what they do, and should hopefully help some with that. I did not do that. Who did that? Oh, you did.
You're talking about
Yes, now I'm going to move into the 4th. Are you rushing me? Now I'm going to move into the 4th year. I'm sorry. The significant revisions to 4th. We do have some 4th year courses, and I'll be done after this. We're excited about the 4th year courses. A couple of things that have changed. There really was another one that was kind of eliminated, I guess you might say, which was the Advanced Algebra and Trig. Yes, no? Yeah. And then the discrete math and the finite math. Really, the advanced algebra trig wasn't eliminated. It's just pre-calculus. The only difference between those courses was how much you might mention limits at the end of the course. And so it seemed to be redundant and maybe even led to some negative things mathematically to have the 2 separate. So pre-calculus serves that purpose. Discrete and finite math also really aren't completely eliminated. What we did was we took the cream of the crop, if you will, of the standards within those and incorporated that into a new course, Applied Mathematical Concepts. And so your discrete and finite math are quite well represented in the Applied Mathematical Concepts. And what that course is about is for non-STEM majors, quite frankly. What does the English major, what do they need? What does the lawyer, who's going to be what kind of math course would be most beneficial to them? And so the Applied Mathematical Concepts, that you got probability, look at financial math. I think we need financial math, and linear programming in industry and all of this. So we've tried to develop a course that would really be beneficial for those students going along those pathways in their life. And then, of course, we have the other courses that you may be much more familiar with. Statistics, again, a lot of from Algebra 2 were was moved into the statistics course so that we can narrow Algebra 2 and put those standards in their appropriate course where they can be given due diligence, you might say. Bridge Math, our remedial course, revamped, looked at, an extremely important course, especially for students that aren't getting the ACT scores they're wanting, or they've struggled and they need that extra help. And it is a true bridge to help them to bridge the gap. And then, of course, our STEM pathway, pre-calculus and calculus, all looked through again. And I think they're very strong courses. That's some of the major highlights of what we've looked at mathematically.
Okay. Where we want to go with our questions or?
Absolutely. So there are any board member questions for either our math or English language arts leads or for Dr. Alshai, who's the chairman of the Standards Recommendation Committee? We'd be happy to entertain those at this time.
Questions? Let me just say that, a tremendous presentation, tremendous amount of work. I've just continued to be impressed with the process that you folks have gone through, the energy and the time and the commitment that's gone into this. When I go to the National Assessment Governing Board meetings, I'm immediately covered up with people asking about how this process is going in Tennessee. And so we're getting a lot of national attention on it. There's a lot of interest out there, and I think it's a process that we can be very proud of. Some great results. I'm really impressed too with the position statement that Lyle covered. We need to keep this in front of us. We were talking about the master plan this morning. There's some things in here that we need to make sure that we've got in our master plan or in our planning process. So I think they're very, very critical. I'm particularly impressed with what we've done with Algebra 2, because I think that's been a real problem area, and it sounds to me like the changes we made there are going to be very, very helpful to what we're trying to accomplish with Algebra 2. Other
I have one question. I want to also thank thank everyone for the work. In a conversation last night at our dinner with Senator Gresham, we started talking about this issue, and one of the things that came up when we talked about it was the concern that we'll have these great standards that will be rigorous and push kids forward, but if we don't then have the tools in the classrooms that support the standards and help the teachers do it, is there any conversation, or will there be conversation for textbook approvals to have some sort of looping with these educators who have been so involved in the standards being somehow a part of that process, so that we can make sure that the options, not choosing what options teachers use, I've heard that loud and clear, but that the options teachers have to teach the standards match the standards?
I'll start that question and then turn it over to the department to finish the answer as they do the textbook commission work. But, I think the conversation around resources has been integral throughout this process. We know that getting the standards right is merely the first step in this process, and then there are many other things that need to follow. And you saw in the position statement by the recommendations committee that they really hinted at the supplemental resources. So I would just highlight again that has really been a part of the process, and that Tammy Shelton, who works at the department as the head of content and resources, has been intimately involved in the process as well, so that she is already knowing what some of the key changes and the key revisions in the standards are going to be to help plan towards some of that. But I don't know if anyone at the department wants to elaborate on textbooks specifically or other resources.
I would reiterate what you said, but I would love for Tammy Shelton, why don't you talk about what we're doing to align the review process and textbooks adoption? I think that would be helpful to the entire board.
I don't want to steal your thunder on textbooks.
Anytime, Laura. Glad to have your help on textbooks. So yes, we're definitely thinking and digging deep into this conversation currently around textbooks. And not only literally within the department are we having those conversations, but through the textbook process, we have something, a process of substitution. So publishers can substitute for a textbook each year. And so a lot of the publishers have actually been contacting us, and we have had conversations about the substitution process, and many publishers are actually gearing up to substitute for the 17-18 year, which will give the teachers additional, resources they need. Many of them also are looking at some supplemental packets. So in addressing textbooks specifically, I know that the publishers are thinking about this as well because they are contacting us about that substitution process. And then in many other ways, we are digging deep into resources. We are having conversations within the department about, looking at, the differences. How have these standards changed? What kind, what are the resources, the professional development that we can provide at the state level? So early stages, but a lot of conversation around the changes and how we're going to help with that.
Thank you. And then just to build on that a little bit further, so obviously the textbook approval cycle is on a regular cycle, or the different subjects come up for review. And math and English language arts came up at a time in which they were not initially anticipated for review. But one thing that Tammy and I worked on together is putting together a comprehensive calendar of aligning standards review with the textbook adoption cycle. And so that when we move forward into science and social studies, that those things will happen in tandem. And while the substitution process will continue to exist, that will help with that alignment piece from the outset with future sets of standards.
Okay, other questions?
So, we're going to, these new standards go into place. How are we going to get teachers up to speed on how to do that?
Well, I'll start by addressing that. We have obviously comprehensive information if these standards are obviously voted on positively by the board, that we would begin our process of creating new resources, creating our trainings, moving forward. And so our goal is during the 16-17 school year, we would have trainings not only during the school year, but also during the summer leading up to the 17-18 school year that would be comprehensive around the changes that are inherent in standards. And we have certainly in our budget request in General Assembly this year requested additional funding to make sure that those trainings are statewide, that they're very in depth, and that we will have the ability during the 16-17 school year and that summer to get our teachers ready for the standards. And so that $3 million+ are inherent as well in our budget request.
Are those participation in those trainings mandatory?
No, they have not been mandatory, but typically we would have representation from every district and certainly every content area that's represented, and they would have a responsibility of redelivering that down to additional content area folks as well as grade level folks. But no, it has not been mandatory per se.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to say that this is the first time in the last 5 years I've been excited about standards. And I've got a feeling that every teacher in Tennessee will be fighting to get the training. So, well done, well done.
Great, great. Edo?
One, let me commend the group. I think this is exceptional. And it reminds me of what we're going through in healthcare when we're working on quality standards. And something you said came up in 1 hour meeting. Suppose this was your family going through these quality standards, what would you want as a standard of care? And suddenly we have a lot of attention there. Laura, one of the things I would like to ask you is, going through this process now, what are the takeaways? What are the things you learned that going forward you would add, do differently? What are some things you learned?
It's a great question. I think we've learned a lot through this process. I think we've learned the importance of the public feedback and public comment period, and so much so, in fact, that it's something that we are incorporating not just in the sets of standards in which we are required to do so, math, English language arts, science, and social studies, but it's also something that we're incorporating into other standards review processes. So for example, we're currently getting ready to start the review process for all of our fine art standards, and I've already built into the timeline for that review work a period of public comment and review. It won't look the same or be on the same website as what we've had for math and English language arts, but it will be publicly posted on our website so that fine arts educators as well as anyone in the public can weigh in on that. So I think that's been one key takeaway. It's just the power of that review process, not only in the fact that it has generated great feedback that our review teams use, but also that it generates a great great deal of buy-in amongst our educators to know that they have a voice and that their feedback is being looked at and taken seriously as a part of the review process. And then I've also, I think we've just seen the power of having so many opportunities for our educators to be involved in the process. So having this robust team of nearly 50 educators on the advisory team who went through and made the standards revisions. They're in classrooms every day. They're in districts every day and have done, I think the standards are the way they are because they're so close to the ground and have done such great work on them. And then the same thing with our recommendations committee, having a committee that could have been composed of any type of individual, but having so many of them that are currently working in schools and school districts, I think really lent just a great additional layer to this process, and their revisions I think are key in making the standards what they are.
Any other question?
Obviously, the state owes all of these people a tremendous debt. They did this on their own time, and labor of love, so we're gonna,
Yeah,
a lot of people are gonna benefit from
Yeah.
their work.
And I think one of the, I guess I said yesterday in the meeting with THEC that I think one, we a fantastic improvement in standards. But the probably just as important issue is the commitment I think we've gained from the total education community and the public about what standards are and what we ought to be expecting. So I think the understanding and commitment that we gained through this process. And I just echo the commitment that these folks have made to this. They've got day jobs, and I'm sure that most of this work is up beyond what they are normally expected to achieve in their day jobs. And, you can tell by the folks that presented here that they're enthusiastic about this and really believe in it, and we really do appreciate it. Job well done. Yeah, I think we can made. Are there any other? Yeah, sir.
I'd be remiss not to say one last thing here in closing. I feel extremely proud of the process and the work that has gone in, and not on anything that I have done individually, but truly who you've heard from today represent some of the best educators in our state who have really put their lives into this work over the last number of months. And I think, we started this process. I was still very new at the state board. We've been charged by the governor. There was legislation that built upon the charge. There was a lot of pressure riding on this process, and there still is. For good reason, because the standards truly are the foundation for so many decisions that we make as a state. And if we got them right, we knew they'd be a model for other states and for the nation. And I entered this process with high hopes and aspirations, also knowing that we were committed to not going backwards, to keeping the rigor in our current standards. And I can tell you, I feel like we have hit it out of the park as a state. Our educators have come through, the public has come through, our team at the state board, I think, has done tremendous work in partnership with the department. All our partners, that one slide that's convoluted and has all the parts, there were a lot of people involved and they all rose to the occasion. I think now we have standards that are not only rigorous, but they're more rigorous and more clear, and I think will serve as a really great guide for all the other decisions, the assessments, the textbooks, the curriculum that hinge on having strong standards. So I just want to say thank you to all of you who are involved, those of you who presented today, especially Joseph and Shannon in particular. You guys have put a lot of work into this, and it shows.
Can we now stand? I told you all last night that they'd done such a great job on this that we would sign them up for social studies. Okay. Anything else before we go to lunch here? Any other comments or?
I just wanted to quickly introduce just two of our additional standards recommendation committee folks who snuck in right as Dr. Alshai and myself were speaking. But Ms. Shannon Duncan, who is an assistant principal in Tullahoma City Schools, and then Ms. Amy Golian, who works in Rutherford County Schools, are also a part of our standards recommendation committee and came today.
Great. Okay. Lunch. Back here at 1 o'clock sharp.